Daniel, number 3, the fiery furnace.
Nebuchadnezzar grew in power until he was the greatest king in the world. Year after year, he added new countries to his kingdom. In every land, he was greatly feared. King Nebuchadnezzar became proud of his success. One day, King Nebuchadnezzar decided to have an enormous golden statue made. His workmen began building the gigantic statue on the plain of Dura, where all could see it. When the statue was finished, it was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. The king sent word to all the officials of his kingdom to attend the dedication of the statue he had set up. Princes, governors, captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and rulers, all were to come to the plain of Dura. No one dared disobey. On the appointed day, the crowd gathered on the plain of Dura. Among them were Daniel's 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. For some reason, Daniel was not there. At the king's order, a herald called out, "O people of all nations and languages, when you hear the music, you must fall down and worship the golden statue that the king has set up. If you refuse, you will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." The music sounded, and the people fell to their knees. They were afraid to disobey, for no one wanted to be killed. All bowed to the ground, except 3 young men. These 3 stood up boldly. They were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Because Nebuchadnezzar had made these 3 young men governors, some of the Chaldeans were jealous. As the music sounded, they watched to see whether Daniel's friends would bow before the idol. When they saw the young men standing bravely alone among all the kneeling princes and nobles, they hurried to tell King Nebuchadnezzar.
"O king, you have decreed that every man should fall down before the idol when the music sounded, and whoever refuses would be thrown into the fiery furnace. There are some Jews that you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, O king. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden statue you have set up."
This made the king angry. He ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought to him. When they came, he asked, "Is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden statue that I have set up?" The king knew these 3 were good rulers, and he thought perhaps they had not understood his command. He would give them another chance. "Be ready when you hear the music to bow down. If you do not worship this idol, you will be thrown into the fiery furnace. Then what God will save you?" Bravely the 3 young men replied to the king, "O king, we do not need another chance. We will never bow down before your idol, for we worship only the one true God. Our God is so great that he can deliver us from your fiery furnace. But even if he does not, we will not worship any idol." Now the king was furious, and the expression on his face changed. He had offered to give these young men a second chance to save their lives, but they had refused him. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than normal. Then he commanded some of his strongest soldiers to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. The 3 men were tied up and carried up to the top of the hot furnace, where they were thrown down into the blazing fire. The furnace was so hot that the raging flames killed the 3 strong men who had carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up to the top. King Nebuchadnezzar watched as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell into the fiery flames, but he could not believe his eyes. The three who had dared disobey his command were now walking around in the fire. Their ropes had been burned off, but they appeared to be unharmed. And there was a fourth man in the fire walking about also. The king asked his advisers, "Did we not throw 3 men into the fire?" "Yes, of course, your majesty," they replied. "But now I see 4 men walking freely about in the middle of the flames, unharmed, and the 4th one looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace. Loudly he called out, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come out at once." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. In amazement, the princes and nobles and rulers gathered around the 3 men. They saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these 3 men. Not a hair of their head had been burned. Even their clothing was unaffected. They did not even smell like smoke, yet the ropes that had been tied around them had burned off. King Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, "Praise the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I issue a new decree. Anyone of any people group, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb, and his house will be made a garbage dump. For there is no other God who is able to deliver like this." Then Nebuchadnezzar gave these 3 brave men higher places in his kingdom. King Nebuchadnezzar recognized the God of heaven as a powerful God, but as he lived in comfort and prosperity, he was filled with sinful pride. Once again, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. Again he sent for the wise men, but this time he told them all about his dream. The wise men listened carefully, but they did not know what the dream meant. At last Daniel came before the king. Remember that Belteshazzar is the Babylonian name that was given to Daniel. The king said, "Belteshazzar, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and that no mystery is too great for you to solve. Now tell me what my dream means." And with that, the king began telling Daniel his dream. "I saw a tree in the middle of the earth. The tree grew very tall and strong, reaching high into the sky for all the world to see. It had fresh green leaves. It was loaded with fruit for all to eat. Wild animals lived in its shade, and birds nested in its branches. People came from all over the earth to eat its fruit. Then, as I lay dreaming, a holy messenger came down from heaven and ordered, 'Cut down the great tree, cut off its branches, shake off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Leave the stump of the tree with its roots in the ground. Let him be drenched with the dew, and share the plants of the earth with the animals. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal for 7 years. Then all who live will know that the God in heaven rules over the kingdoms of the earth." When King Nebuchadnezzar was done telling his dream, Daniel sat stunned for a moment. Daniel knew what the dream meant, but he was afraid to tell the king. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Do not be afraid. Do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you." Daniel took courage and said, "The great tree in your dream is you, for you have become a great king throughout the earth. In your dream you saw a holy messenger from heaven ordering the tree to be cut down. Now here is the interpretation of the dream, your majesty. The Most High God has passed a sentence against you, and you will lose your kingdom for 7 years. During that time you will live like an animal in the field. You will eat grass like an ox, and the dew will fall upon you. When you finally acknowledge that the Most High God rules over all the earth, then you will live among men again and be restored to your kingdom." Because Daniel knew that God is merciful, he urged, "O king, listen to my advice. Leave your sins and do what is right, and show mercy to the needy. If you do this, perhaps your days of peace and prosperity will be lengthened." The king listened to the interpretation of his dream, but he did not take Daniel's advice. A year passed, and nothing unusual happened. Perhaps Nebuchadnezzar almost forgot about the strange dream. He grew even prouder of his great kingdom, the beauty of his palace grounds, and the famous city of Babylon. One day as he walked through the palace to admire it, he said, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built by my power for my glory?" While the words were still in King Nebuchadnezzar's mouth, a voice came from heaven.
"King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken. The kingdom is taken from you. You will be driven away from people to live with the wild animals for 7 years, until you acknowledge that the Most High God is ruler over the kingdom of men."
At that very moment, the king lost his mind and thought himself to be a wild animal. He was driven away from people out of the city. The king lived in the fields and ate grass like the cattle. His body was drenched with dew, and his hair grew like eagle's feathers, and his fingernails and toenails grew so long that they even looked like birds' claws. After 7 years, God restored Nebuchadnezzar's mind. Then the king lifted up his eyes to heaven and honored and glorified God. He praised the Lord for his greatness and said, "God does what he wants with the army of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can hold him back or question what he has done." When the people of Babylon saw that their king was now in his right mind, they welcomed him back. They honored and served King Nebuchadnezzar just as they had done before. Nebuchadnezzar now knew that God is greater than any man. He praised and honored the King of Heaven and said, "God is able to humble those who walk in pride." The similarity between the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar set up here in Daniel 3 and the image with a head of gold from Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2 is no coincidence. Nebuchadnezzar, in his sinful pride, deliberately made a statue entirely of gold to contradict the dream that God had given him, where the head of gold represented Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. By making a statue entirely of gold, the king was declaring that the day of his reign and authority would never end. This was directly opposed to God's declared plan interpreted by Daniel. We see an obvious show of Nebuchadnezzar's sinful pride in constructing this golden image. God showed Nebuchadnezzar a great miracle when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked unharmed out of the fiery furnace. The king had no excuse for continuing to walk in pride after seeing that powerful miracle, but he refused to humble himself. It took 7 years of losing his mind to humble this great king. But finally, Nebuchadnezzar recognized that the Most High God of heaven rules over the earth, and there is no one greater than he. There are many things we can learn from this lesson. I've thought of 3. Maybe you can think of more. First, God hates sinful pride. It's important for each of us to beware of sinful pride creeping into our thoughts and actions. Nebuchadnezzar paid a high price for his sin. We also see that God was ready to forgive Nebuchadnezzar when he humbled himself. Second, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down and worship the golden idol, they must have known they would be discovered, yet they obeyed God anyway. When man's laws contradict God's laws, we need to be ready to stand up and obey God, just like these three men did. Third, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not the only Jewish young men that were in the king's training program, so we can assume that other Jewish young men were there at the dedication of the golden statue. Yet only Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down to the image. What had happened to the faith of all the other young men? Apparently, they had become so attracted to Babylon that they had lost their faith in God. It is just as easy for believers in our modern world to lose sight of who God is. We need to continually see life through the lens of Daniel 4:35. We cannot explain why God does all that He does, but we can stand back and testify that He is in charge. When we understand that God is in control of things, our worries will be replaced by calmness as we choose to do the right thing and refuse to worry about the consequences. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to His will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain His hand or say to Him, "What have you done?" Daniel 4:35.